Tugendhat, Security Minister in the Home Office, requires no introduction for anyone here. Just always delighted to welcome him back after his outstanding series of work for us on fog of law and lawfare against British troops, stemming from his period in Afghanistan and Iraq when he was in the army. Pleasure now, obviously, to welcome him back in his current role, where he's going to address threats to democracy from state actors. Also particularly important for policy exchange to be, as an institution, to be doing so at this time, with our work stream in this area being led by our new head of foreign policy and resilience, Sophia Gaston, who will be addressing issues around resilience in the national security context, the economic impacts around semiconductors, and also leading work on public education in line with our charitable mission on aspects of resilience that the public needs to achieve greater understanding of the detail of. Tom's going to address us for 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it to questions. If I could just ask anyone who's online, please, to stick up their electronic hand as soon as possible, and usual house rules here, that no question too outrageous for the minister or shadow minister in question. You just have to state your name and organisation first. So, Tom, thank you. Look forward
to me out of office already.
Exactly. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. Look, I appreciate I've chosen quite literally the quietest time of the week, as the Prime Minister himself is on his feet right now, so I'm sure the attention will be elsewhere for many. But policy exchange has been an extremely important part of my political life for the past decade, and so it's an enormous pleasure to be back here again. It's been important because it's helped shape the arguments that I've been making, first of all in the Foreign Affairs Committee and now here in the Home Office, on how we defend ourselves. We started off, as Dean will remember only too well, talking about how we defend ourselves against foreign legal threats and indeed domestic legal threats as they shape our ability to act as armed forces. And now I'd like to talk about an evolving threat that we're seeing, an emerging threat, which is, of course, the state threats to our democracy and indeed others. I think we should start by recognising what a remarkable achievement the United Kingdom is. It's not just 4 nations come together, but actually a patchwork of many more nations than that under a single flag. It wasn't that long ago, in historical terms, just over 1,000 years ago, that people owed allegiance to kings in Kent and Fife, in Ulster and Strathclyde. But those kingdoms have intertwined, and through a combination of stories and law, we've made ourselves into one of the most extraordinary countries in the world. We've exported stability, we've exported principles and the regulations that have constructed a world of free trade and freedom that has made so many prosperous and enabled so much happiness. Now, this unity was built on shared stories of our past, creating what has become a firm foundation for our future. And it was only possible because the stories that we were able to tell each other, the stories, the myths, the histories, turned around to bind a people together, to give us a common foundation, a common root. But those stories that unite can also divide. And today we're seeing that shared understanding fray. We're seeing stories twisted and corrupted deliberately to sow confusion and division. We're seeing threats to our politics and, because of that, to our nation. And I'm not saying this just because I happen to be a very strong unionist and I believe that our union is one of the pillars of liberty in the world. I don't need to make that argument. Our role in the United Nations, in NATO, in the Commonwealth, in the World Trade Organization, and many, many other organizations besides, points to the essential role that our union has had in creating a safer and more prosperous world. I make the argument because we're not just dealing with competing narratives today, we're dealing with false ones. Disinformation matters. It can shape debate and it can change outcomes. Now, this is because democracy isn't just an event. It's a process. It's how we talk to each other, not just how we decide the future in a ballot box, but how we shape that future through discussion. It's as much about journalists, lawyers, businesses, and civic activists as it is about politicians. Fundamentally, it's about citizens. How we participate, what we do in every community is just as important as what is done to us. That's why joining political parties, getting together with friends and neighbours, championing ideas and choosing candidates is the bedrock of our democracy and the heart of our freedom. Because democracy can no more be reduced to an election than an economy can be reduced to a market. Defending it demands us to understand what matters throughout our society, not just on polling day. Now, some have understood this better than many in free countries. They see the source of our strength and have understood the levers that can be used to weaken us, spreading division and lies, challenging the narratives that enable our national conversation and debate, make us less resilient, more brittle, and at greater risk. And our response must be about more than just protecting politicians or elections. I don't want to confuse, however, debate for division. It's entirely right for us to debate our constitution and our laws. It's essential for our freedom that we do. We should argue and disagree. A 99% approval rating may sound wonderful if you're North Korean, but it is truly the sign of a dictatorship, not of a democracy. What is critical is that we should know where the arguments are coming from. We should know that these debates are triggered by the interests of our nation and our communities, by the peoples who we should rightly be representing. We shouldn't be having them triggered by outside forces and a hidden hand. For too long, foreign interference has been slowly creeping into British democracy. And as Security Minister, much of what comes across my desk is acute threats. Quite obviously, those are the ones that we respond to immediately. But it is the strategic threats to our democracy, because the acts are part of a systemic campaign over a long period of time to degrade our sovereignty, that concern me most. They are threats not just to life, they are threats to our way of life. This emerging era of state-based threats isn't just le carré, it's not the silent battle of shadows, but a challenge to our future and to our society. And it's not a secret that state-based threats are growing and coming from many different sources as competition intensifies, impacting countries across the world, including the United Kingdom and our allies. Now, we've seen Russia's abhorrent and illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've seen the attacks around Europe. Indeed, the Estonian ambassador is here and who can talk about the attacks we've seen on his great country over the last decade or so. We've even seen attacks here in London and in Salisbury that have sadly cost the life of one individual, one British individual, and one Russian. Now, from China, we've seen increased militarization and the growing tension over Taiwan. And Iran's malign behavior in the Middle East directly threatens our partners and our interests. They are brutally suppressing courageous people in the streets who are calling for an end to the control of a corrupt and corrupted religious and security elite, claiming authority from God. All of this is clear. Much of it has been clear for some time. What's new is that we're seeing this grow at home. During the COVID pandemic, we saw Moscow try to sow disinformation. We saw fake bots trying to promote different arguments, false arguments, on social media. In our universities, we've seen debate silenced by voices controlled by Beijing, and now we're seeing Tehran try to exploit similar routes. As the head of MI5 put it recently, the Iranian regime is projecting its campaign to silence dissent directly to the UK, with at least 10 such threats since January, as he said. Now, as recently as last month, I, along with other MPs, were sadly given security guidance because of the Iranian threat. Since Ken McCullum's speech, just a few weeks ago, we've seen even more out of Iran. This is not and has not yet finished. And we've seen states, including China and their United Front Work Department, try to silence incredibly courageous academics who are trying to exercise the freedom that every academic in the United Kingdom should enjoy. All those are attempts to silence our national debate and to shape our democracies. All of those demand responses. There is a deeper layer. The activity that hides itself in online platforms and undermines our democratic discourse is like a poison seeping through the body politic. It's degrading the media environment and attacking our free speech. Russian disinformation on Twitter is increasingly obvious, and the bots that we're seeing attack Ukrainian voices or try to silence those calling out the Kremlin's human rights abuses in Syria are now often, thank goodness, written about. And as the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I was privileged to chair, reported in 2019, Chinese encouraged smothering of dissent, even beyond its borders, is another. And that's why we need to look at the sources of disinformation. We need to look, beyond the sources of disinformation and to its channels. As Ofcom reported, only recently, the reach of newspapers and online sources has fallen from roughly a half in 2020 to below 40% in just 2 years. Over that same period, TikTok has gone as a news source from having 1% to 7% take up. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but when you look at the group of younger people, 16 to 24-year-olds, you'll see that the figure is much higher. Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok are all about a third of the news sources young people turn to, outstripping their reliance on the ITV or BBC networks. Now, the influence of social media platforms on our younger generations here in the United Kingdom and around the world is pervasive. The content on these platforms will, of course, influence minds. Yet it's worth noting that foreign states hold considerable sway over the algorithms that are the editor on these sources. The challenge for a free country like ours is how we manage this debate, how we keep a society free and open, as the last integrated review committed us to, quite rightly, while defending ourselves from the dishonesty that could tear us apart. The same challenge applies to the platforms themselves. They profit from the liberty that allows the trade in ideas and goods. So ensuring they defend that liberty is not asking them to be altruistic. It's asking them to invest in their own futures. We believe in the liberty of shared views. We believe in the liberty of ideas. We also believe in the liberty of cat videos. But we also need to balance all of this with the reality of the world that we live in. To update the integrated review, we are going to have to consider many of these issues in the round and the challenges that they pose to us all. And when it comes to tackling foreign influence and malign activity, our National Security Bill, currently in the House of Lords, will modernise our outdated laws and provide the foundations for being better able to protect our people and our institutions from state-based threats. Specifically, our Foreign Influence Registration Scheme has been created to tackle covert influence in the United Kingdom. The scheme's aims are twofold: to strengthen the resilience of the United Kingdom political system against covert foreign influence, and to provide greater assurance around the activities of specified foreign powers or entities. Those who are working on covert political interference will, I'm afraid, face a simple choice. They will have to register and highlight the activities they seek to hide, or not, and risk prosecution. The scheme will not impose restrictions on legitimate activities of people or businesses. It's here to encourage openness and transparency, and it's necessary precisely because we know that those who wish to do us harm are using the shadows to evolve new techniques. Together, these threats challenge our democracy. Some are state threats. Others are from groups trying to distort us for other reasons. The government, this government, is taking them all extremely seriously. The Prime Minister has demonstrated he's serious about it and about tackling state threats and the specific threat to our democratic resilience by asking me to lead the Defending Democracy Task Force. Now, this is not just about guarding ministers or protecting technology, nor even about MPs and those elected across our country to serve our communities in the parliaments and assemblies and councils. Despite the tragedies that all of us have seen in recent years, despite the recognition that that is so important, that is not only what this is about. It's about making sure that all of us, as citizens, are free and able to debate the ideas and choose the future that makes us strong. Its primary focus will be to protect the democratic integrity of the United Kingdom from threats of foreign influence. We will work across government and with Parliament, the United Kingdom's intelligence community, the devolved administrations, local authorities, the private sector and civil society on the full range of threats facing our democratic institutions. It'll be looking at foreign interference in our elections and electoral process, disinformation, physical and cyber threats to the democratic institutions and those who represent them, foreign interference in public office, political parties and universities, and what we call transnational repression. What we mean by that is the activity of those who seek to stifle free expression in diaspora communities in the United Kingdom, those who try to silence the debate that they, as anyone else in the United Kingdom, should be able to enjoy. We've seen the most recent example of this in the so-called overseas police stations that China has set up around the country and indeed around the world. Now, I've reached out to Five Eyes partners, and I'm keen to work closely with European and other international friends to tackle state threats together. This is not just a British problem. This is a problem that all democracies face, and sadly, too many autocracies are trying to use. Over the past decade, we've seen the evolving threat to our national life and begun to understand the form it's truly taking. The challenges we face to our democracy and national security from state-based foreign threats, now and in the years to come, are serious, complex, and abundant. They will not be solved quickly. They will not be solved by the government acting alone. All of us, individuals and organisations, have a role in defending our freedoms, and we best start by understanding and debating the threats that we face. For all our achievements as a country, from innovation and scientific discovery to economic prosperity, cultural wealth, and the cohesion that has made this country so extraordinarily rich and strong, it is our freedom that enables it all. And as we look to the challenges of the future, and yes, there are many, the essential lesson of the past is that dictatorships may look solid in the short term, but they can't manage change. Real stability, real resilience comes from debate, from discussion, and the democracy that flows from it. Protecting democracy is essential to us all. Thank you.
There will be many questions, just having a flavour from the audience here, just of who would. Gentleman at the back, if you just state your name and organisation. Gentleman at the back.
Ian Morling, Winchester Partners. Tom, is there a website where all that you said lays out all the different challenges to which people could actually feed into anything they identify? Because that would be the modern way of making us all aware of what's going on. I mean, frankly, so much of what you said I hadn't really gathered. The mainstream media hasn't been covering it so precisely. And it seems to me that it would be a collaborative, cooperative basis for all Democrats to subscribe to. The second problem, if I could say, because Elon Musk uses the word truth, and the word truth is a dangerous word, because truth also corresponds, people think is truth, because they filter it through their belief system. So there are facts, interpretations of facts, there's narrative, and there's truth. And I think we have to be very careful about mixing those. I don't know what your thoughts are on those two questions. Thank you.
Tom.
Well, as a Catholic, I'm always very careful about defining the truth. I let the Pope do that for me. But look, the essential element of this is that we need debate, right? We need proper discussion, we need debate. What we're seeing, sadly, is that debate is being silenced when we're seeing different forces putting a heavy hand on the tiller, if you like, of some of these sources. And we need to make sure that they are open and able to enjoy the same challenge, the same open challenge that is essential in, as you put it, the mainstream media. Because the great strength of the mainstream media is that it is open to challenge. You do know who pays, you do know who owns, and if you have a problem with it, you know who to go back to. The challenge that we have with other media sources is knowing the source, and that's what makes it so much more difficult.
Can you create a website to red flag the sources? That's my point.
Your second point was about, your first point was about how we can make this into an interactive engagement. And look, I think that's incredibly important. If you look at the way in which our solutions are best come to, It's the same as our political solutions or indeed any other solution. It's by debate and challenge. And so having ideas coming from outsiders, as it were, not the Home Office, not the government, not the intelligence sources, is incredibly important. And finding ways to do that is absolutely essential. So yeah, I'll be coming forward with some ideas on that.
Right. Gentleman at the front, if you just wait till the microphone. Name and organisation, please.
Khalid Mahmood, Member of Parliament, Birmingham, Perry Bar. Two questions, one in terms of the external threat and one in terms of the internal issue. External, we've got great universities doing fantastic job leading on real technologies. Cybersecurity is a real issue. We've got lots of foreign influences coming into our universities, paying towards those cyber schools and making away with huge amount of technology that we have. Will there be, under the integrated review, a position to try and safeguard those and register people who are trying to donate to those universities and individuals that come to those and what their outcomes are going to be? That's very important. Secondly, in the internal threat, is we've got a number of organizations internally here, certainly in terms of the Islamist organizations that I deal with, who are weaning young people away from the mainstream community by use of social media. And what they try to do then internally turn them against the state, and we need to really look at that technology use that they have in the UK itself. So both of those issues, please, Tom.
So the first question was about academic liberties, and look, I've already touched on some elements of that. Clearly this is to be done jointly with the Education Department and to make sure that what we're actually doing is we're promoting the UK for what it truly is, which is a centre of excellence, a centre of ideas, and a centre of opportunity. And that's something we can only do if we have an open economy and the ability to discuss free ideas. What I've touched on is sadly some of the aspects that we've seen from countries around the world, particularly sadly from China, but others as well, who use our universities and then silence debate within them. And this, as you know, is something we worked on together a number of years ago. But making sure that we engage with the universities to make sure that they have the opportunity to shape that is incredibly important. And I know that the Education Secretary is already on it. And indeed, when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee recently, it was something that I spent time doing, which was engaging with universities to understand what the pressures on them were. So I take your point entirely. Your second point was about domestic challenge. And this is, you quite rightly speak about Islamist organizations who are seeking to turn minds against their own country, and that's extremely important, and you have spoken extremely powerfully about this many times in the past. I mean, it is surely true that all British citizens are equal and all British citizens have the equal right to engage in the political discourse that it makes us a great country. What some groups are trying to do is to silence voices within our nation and to convince them that they're outsiders even in their own country. This is both false and dangerous. And so we've got to make sure that part of this discussion is about that. And indeed, as you know, we're looking at various different ways in which to challenge those narratives in coming months. And your own work has been incredibly important on that.
Gentleman towards the front there. Name and organisation, please.
Admiral Lord West, simple sailor and former security minister. The National Security Bill going through, which is an important bill, as you say, and thank goodness it's going through. By common consent, everyone says that the Official Secrets Act 1989 should be changed and got rid of. Why is it that we're not doing that in that bill? We're getting rid of the two older ones, but for some reason we're avoiding that, and yet across all the agencies, all the security world, across all parties, there is a common consensus we need to get rid of it. Why is that not happening?
Admiral, as you will know very well in Parliament, there's sometimes a balance between time and effect, and here it's trying to get this bill through, which, as you quite rightly say, is urgent and genuinely urgent. We've seen recently incidents which would be illegal under the new national security laws, which are currently extremely unwise but not yet illegal, and so we do need to get this bill through urgently. Getting through the Official Secrets Act 89 and the changes that would require to get it through would have huge implications on many other laws, and therefore it will take longer to do it.
Thank you. A bottle of champagne, I think, for anyone who can name all of the security ministers between Admiral of the Lord West and Tom Tugendhat. I think that's a party trick I can safely get away with here. I know some questions online. John Rathbone, Financial Times. Can you hear me, John?
He barks.
John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, but can you hear me?
Well, loud and clear, please. Your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for your overview and eloquent speech. You talked about the importance of discussion. An hour before you came to the stage, the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament released its annual report, which it said was deeply troubling the lack of oversight that the government affords it of some of the intelligence agencies' operations. And it also complained that it hadn't met with the Prime Minister since 2014, or that it's supposed to meet once a year. Is this something that you'll be looking forward to change?
So this is something I've already engaged with. It won't surprise you, as the former chair of a committee in Parliament, that this is something I take very seriously. And Julian Lewis has been a friend for many years, and I look forward to making sure that he gets the access he should. In fact, since I've been here in this new role, I've engaged with him on many occasions, and indeed other members of the committee too. So I think that the importance of the ISC is, something I take very seriously.
Kitty Donaldson, Bloomberg News, political editor. Can you hear me, Kitty?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Minister. You're talking about state threats, and I wondered if you could give us your assessment of the threat from Afghanistan since the fall of Kabul. And separately, as a citizen, should a British citizen worry more about state threat, or should they worry about a sort of low-tech, inspired by attack, perhaps a van running them over?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the end of that, I'm afraid. But
Could you repeat it? Sorry, just a little louder for everyone here. Sorry.
Yes, of course. All I was asking was, as a citizen, should one worry more about a low-level, highly unsophisticated attack, or should one worry about the threat from China?
So I think the first thing that, as a citizen, I think we should all recognise is the extraordinary courage and effect that our agencies, I mean MI5, 6, GCHQ, but also the police, the CT police in particular, have achieved over recent years. I mean, it's quite a remarkable success that they've managed to manage the threats that have been rained against us, and yet to limit the number of incidents the way they have. I have to say I have nothing but praise for our agencies, our services, and indeed for our police force, or police forces rather, for the extraordinary work that they've done. I think that's the first thing. Your other point about Afghanistan is interesting. Look, it's not exactly a secret to know what I think about Afghanistan. I made my views rather clear 18 or so months ago. The reality is we don't have a presence there. That does change the nature of the threat. But we do have partners and allies in the region with whom we're working to make sure that our country is kept safe. Now, the real threat to Afghanistan, sadly, is to the Afghan people. We're seeing a country that is being destroyed by a theocratic dictatorship, another one. But this one, rather more of a confusion of drugs gangs and terror groups than it is an actual state, and sadly has left many, many millions of people extremely weakened in a very vulnerable position as the winter is coming again. So I have to say the main threat for Afghanistan is the Afghan people themselves.
Thank you. Natasha Clark from The Sun. Can you hear me, Natasha?
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud
Yes.
and clear, thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister. I just want to ask you, do you feel that the Prime Minister has watered down his language in relation to deeming China a threat, which he's recently declined to do? Would you call China and Iran threats to the UK? And just one on elections, what are we doing to beef up our election security ahead of a possible election within the next couple of years?
So,
Thanks.
Natasha, look, I don't think he's watered down anything, actually. I think he's been extremely clear on this. And making our language align with the language of the Canadians and the Americans and the Australians, I see as a sort of simple diplomatic protocol, if you like. You know my words, and I've used them before, and I'll use them again. There are threats emerging from Beijing, and there are threats emerging from Tehran, and there are threats emerging from Moscow. And how we deal with them is absolutely fundamental to our security. What we call them, well, that's the job of diplomats, to find words and to align them with partners and allies. And so I completely respect what the Prime Minister's doing, and I entirely support him. What I think is also important, however, is to recognise that this Prime Minister is the first to have recognised the actual threat to our democratic fabric itself and to have formed this task force. I think it's extremely important to pay credit where it's due, and he's done that at a time when there are many, many other draws on his time, and you know, I think we all recognise that. But I think his understanding that we know, Natasha, who owns the newspaper that you work for, we know who pays your salary, we know who publishes your words, and we know how to hold you account if we agree or disagree with what you say, is, you know, a huge strength to our media industry. The challenge we've got is that in the next election, 1/3 of first-time voters will be getting their news from organizations whose editorial board is comprised of members of the Chinese Communist Party or other similar groups, or indeed from simply algorithms that we cannot interrogate or check. Now that is a concern, because openness does matter, and editorial choices do matter. And it is important to our democracy that we know what they are.
Lady there at the front, you just wait till the microphone comes. Name and organisation, please.
Thank you very much. Nomi Bayakov, Chatham House. Thank you very much, Minister, for a very important presentation. A couple of very different questions. One is in terms of how you are planning obviously to map out the threats, and then in terms of the key question, of course, is how to then deal with them once they're mapped out. I was wondering whether you're planning to reach out to think tanks as well, not just my own, but there's a whole breadth of think tanks in London, UK. The second question, very different, is are you also looking at potential weapons of mass destruction as threats from chemical attacks, potentially biological or nuclear materials, also by non-state actors? There wasn't that much mention of the, it's not just states, and you mentioned China and Russia, and Afghanistan was recently mentioned, Iran, but the question really for me is how to deal with them in order to prevent an escalation. Thank you very much.
So on the question on think tanks, yes, absolutely. We're reaching out to think tanks, and indeed we'll be getting in touch with you shortly, I hope. On weapons of mass destruction, you'll forgive me, but on the Defending Democracy Task Force, we are not engaged in looking at weapons of mass destruction. It does come up quite a lot in different ways in the intelligence that crosses our desks, as you can imagine, but that's part of a slightly different portfolio rather than as part of this portfolio.
Thank you. I see a lot of just trying to get a flavour of how many questions. Gentleman there towards the front. Yes. And name and organisation, please.
Carl Dinnan from ITV News. Minister, a couple on China. China, one of the overt things they've done is to sanction people here, including yourself and other parliamentarians. I was just wondering, has that had a real world effect, or is that just a posturing? And secondly, you mentioned TikTok during your presentation. To what extent is TikTok, in your estimation, being used as a tool by the Chinese regime?
So the reality is that the Chinese Communist Party has published something on its website claiming that several of us in various different ways are sanctioned, but it doesn't actually have any obvious impact even under its own laws. So frankly, I'm yet to understand what that means. I think it's more just, I'll be careful what I say. It's more just for show than I think it is for reality. It's intended to hit back at the sanctions that were put on various officials. It's quite interesting that many of us were sanctioned for speaking out about human rights violations against Chinese citizens, and those, it seems a very odd thing for a government to do, to deny its own human rights to its own citizens, but that seems to be what it's doing. So what I mean, I'll leave that there because it's very hard to be certain what the CCP is trying to do. On the question on TikTok, look, the reality is there are many different platforms around. TikTok is one of them, but there are many different platforms around. And the reality is that editorial control is exercised by algorithms that are programmed by individuals. The idea that these are sort of neutral actors, scientifically controlled editorial decisions, they're not. They're chosen. They're just chosen by somebody who's programmed them in advance rather than somebody who's decided on the day whether or not to run your news story or somebody else's news story. Now that's editorial control, and it's electronic editorial control, it's algorithmic editorial control, but it's still editorial control. And understanding what that source is important. I mean, you work for an extremely important news source, and yet, as for 16 to 24-year-olds, Ofcom tells us that you're the news source for about 24% of them. Now, that's a bit more than the BBC, but it's less than, I think Instagram is the top at 29. I think TikTok and YouTube are roughly at 28. Now, that's an interesting change because my generation, you're much higher up than that, as you know. And so, understanding that change and understanding where that control goes and what that means, I think is incredibly important, because whether or not these sources, whichever they are being used to influence or to shape debate today may not be the question. The truth is the bridge is being built. What's crossing it is yet to be worked out.
I just take advantage of Chairman's privilege just for a second. Is just you touched upon the importance to you of the union, and just was wondering potential state threats to the unity of the kingdom from big state actors like Russia, China, attempting to stir things up in Scotland and beyond. A particularly active Chinese consulate, for example, in Belfast, certainly more active, according to the view of some Americans, than the US consulate presently is there, and so on. So that's the first. The second question about our national resilience, just to say a bit about national resilience being a bit more, because there have been one or two questions from members of the audience beforehand, national resilience being dependent upon economic resilience, how investment, educating people how investment would best be conducted, notably pension funds in the vulnerable aspects of the tech space. Just wondering if you could say something on both subjects.
Sure. I mean, look, I don't want to make this a union speech. I'm blatantly a unionist, and I feel very passionately about the fact that our country works better when it is united. That's not exactly a controversial thing to say as a conservative. But I don't want to go into the divisions that some people are trying to achieve through our different debates. It was clearly perfectly legitimate to debate the shape and future of our country, and to debate even whether it should be in its constituent, whether it should break up. I mean, a moment not only of enormous sadness to me, but it would be a huge challenge to many of our friends and allies who depend on our strength and our stability in order to build their own future. I mean, it's certainly true that the United Kingdom is one of the essential pillars of NATO, for example, and many of our allies in the NATO alliance would be deeply concerned if the Union of the United Kingdom were to divide and to see what would effectively look like the Brexit debates, but multiplied by 100, continue over the decades that followed. So clearly, I think that the importance is that we hold our union together, not just for ourselves, but for others. That said, the real interest that state actors have so far demonstrated in our country is to undermine our ability to talk to each other, not so much to promote particular ideas. And that is something that I think we've got to bear in mind. This isn't about silencing debate, even debate quite obviously I don't particularly like, but separatist movements have a right to make their case, even if I don't agree with the case they're making. Now, your second point was about economics, and look, resilience isn't just about, it's not just about the way in which we shape our own future in democratic terms. It's about our ability to build it in economic terms. I mean, there's a simple reality that you can't be a capitalist without capital. And if you look at the changes that have happened in this country since many of the reforms in the early 2000s, where increasing amount of investment has gone into bonds and not equities, to the point where we now have, I think we now have about 60% of our investment in various pension funds is now in bonds and about 40% in equities, quite strikingly different from Canada or Australia, which have similar, not the same, but similar pension systems. You see that you're seeing a capital deficit, which is leading to an element of resilience challenge as well, because the reality is, if you want to have, as Carl had mentioned it, there universities that are throwing out ideas, that are generating opportunity in businesses for the future, you need to have the capital investment that follows them through and is able to protect them. And sadly, the lack of capital investment has led to what I've consistently described as the two worst strategic decisions in the UK's recent past, which is the sale of DeepMind and indeed the sale of Arm. Now, I don't blame either party for it. It's quite clear that Demis and his colleagues at DeepMind didn't have a choice. The reality was there wasn't the depth of capital available in the UK, and Google have been an extremely good partner for them. And the truth is that Arm, well, they didn't have the choice either at the time, and perhaps they have a choice now.
Thank you. I see lots more. Question, I'm just trying to get a flavour from the gentleman at the back. Yes, name and organisation, please.
Thanks. Dan Saber from The Guardian. You talked a lot about TikTok, but is there a plan to regulate it, or are you just raising a lot of concerns?
So I'm raising the point that I think is an important one, which is that who owns, who chooses, and who publishes are important questions. And your own paper has an extremely public way of expressing its views, and indeed many of your journalists have taken to Twitter and to TikTok and other organisations in order to explain the debates within your own editorial board. Now, I think that's healthy. I think understanding what drives and what shapes the decision to put what on which paper or on which page online is extremely important. And I think what your paper and indeed Carl's broadcast organisation and in many other papers around the world are doing is incredibly important. The point I'm raising, I think, is fundamental, which is if ByteDance declare, for example, the TikTok algorithm, or rather the Chinese state to declare the ByteDance algorithm a national security asset, that poses challenges. Now, this isn't to accuse ByteDance or TikTok of doing anything. It merely poses challenges because we need to understand how systems work and what systems are trying to generate and what results they're aiming for in order to understand what it is that these organizations are doing. And so having an openness online is, I think, as important as it is to understand media ownership in other areas.
Thank you. I see. Question online. Paddy McGuinness. Paddy, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. You hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear, yes, Steve.
Thanks very much. Minister, thanks for the presentation, and indeed thank you for all you're doing, especially with the National Security Bill. I now work with Brunswick Group, but I'm a former Deputy National Security Advisor, Intelligence, Security and Resilience. So as you might imagine, I'm firmly behind what you're doing. I wanted to ask, though, how do we avoid doing the hostile states work for them by delegitimizing democratic processes or even parties because of their attempts at manipulation rather than their success at manipulation? And I have in mind here some of the rather feeble attempts to interfere in the Scottish referendum and the case that's made for interference in the Brexit referendum and indeed in elections, including in France and elsewhere, and some of the claims about money going to political parties. And I was struck that you didn't mention, when you were speaking, you didn't mention the Electoral Commission. And of course, in constituency elections, we rely on that body to make a judgment about whether something inappropriate has happened and people may be fined or even the election rerun. So I wonder who's going to set the threshold. And my former clients, I know, the security services, don't have much interest in setting the democratic thresholds. They feel that's something that happens in authoritarian states.
So I think this is a challenge, bluntly, and this is a challenge that we need to debate openly. And that's why what I'm proposing in the areas that I'm talking about are about having this conversation as publicly as we can. Now, I happen to think that there are many areas where we have got this balance right. I happen to think that if you look at recent referendums and elections, I'm not saying nobody has ever tried to influence any of them from a hostile state power. That's not what I would claim. But I would certainly claim, and I think reasonably, that none has succeeded. I think what we've seen in recent years, and in fact probably a lot longer than before that, is we've seen a fair electoral process deciding outcomes that the British people broadly chose. The broadly is only because our own electoral system does occasionally throw up anomalies, so I won't go into the details of that. But the reality is that I think we have a fair electoral process that works well when it is public. And what we've seen is we've seen extraordinarily public debate of ideas and areas, because actually almost all media has been broadcast. The challenge we're seeing now is that more media is becoming narrowcast. And as it does so, the importance of understanding the system that chooses the message that is targeted at the individual gains in importance, because it is less open to challenge, and therefore the source is that much more important.
I think one last question, and my friend gentleman at the front been waiting patiently. I'm sorry if I've disappointed anybody, but please.
Ryan Baldry from the Coalition for Global Prosperity. Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. One of your points around tackling disinformation from hostile states, I was just wondering if your review will look at how UK soft power can maintain our safety and security at home, and institutions such as UK Aid, Overseas Development, the World Service, how the impact of funding reductions on those has or hasn't left the UK more susceptible to misinformation from hostile states, not just within the UK, but within countries that we're trying to work with to build what was, the Network of Liberty or Global Britain, and basically what the implications of those will be.
So, sorry, just 1 second. The gentleman been waiting patiently there at the front. Yes, just.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah. Godfrey Cromwell, House of Lords. 2 quick questions, and they will be quick. First of all, how do we tackle the fact that many senior UK law firms are being used by foreign powers to suppress public interest journalism? Second question, with the security, the definition of foreign influences. It's always difficult in law to define things by their perimeter. Let us suppose I'm German, Hungarian, Malaysian, you take your pick, citizen living in the UK. I have friends in the media, I have friends in Parliament. I regularly meet them for a chat. Should I be registering as a foreign influencer or risk prosecution?
So I'll come to the second question first, and I'll come back to yours if it's all right, Ryan, which is this debate is going on in your house right now, so I hope you'll be making these points. Because the reality is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an open and transparent society. We're not trying to silence debate. And so engaging in debate is absolutely legitimate, and there's certainly no question that foreign correspondents or indeed foreign individuals couldn't engage in debate. That's absolutely, this is a free country, and part of our freedom is that others enjoy their freedom here too. So that's an enormously important area. And the reality is that one can attempt to draw these areas too narrowly, when what we really need to be doing is to focus on what we're trying to do, and then to have the debate as to how best to achieve it. Now, you spoke about law firms, and I presume you're referring to things like SLAPS legislation and Catherine Belton and things like that. Well, look, there are some extremely powerful voices on this. Oliver Bulow, Catherine Belton, Tom Keating, Luke Harding. There's many, many very, very impressive journalists who've done some really important work on this. And looking at this is going to be really important. It's not something I have yet come to, for the simple reason that it's really the Lord Chancellor's area, because of course it's a legal reform question. But I think there are a lot of questions that individuals have to ask themselves. And in the 2018 report that the Foreign Affairs Committee produced called Moscow's Gold, it looks at an aspect of legal representation and the questions that raise from it. So I get the question, and it is certainly something that I'm very aware of. Ryan, you raised a question about outside elements. Look, the purpose of the task force is to report into the integrated review, which, as you know, is being updated. And the whole of the integrated review is going to be looking at a much wider area, which will include that. Because actually, this Prime Minister has been extremely clear on his commitment to engagement abroad. You know, when Rishi was running for the leadership, and indeed when he was Chancellor, he spoke very clearly and passionately about making sure that we have a connection with countries around the world and that we shape each other's lives in a positive way, because we are as shaped by others as they are by us. And so I think this is part of the wider discussion that is going to be feeding into the integrated review. I look forward to having some voice in it. I know you're going to have some voice in it. You regularly do have expressions on our national debate, and I'm delighted seeing you do so. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. As I say, there's been stiff competition with this event. The quantity and quality of the audience today proves the enduring importance of this topic, and just please all remain to me thank the Security Minister. We look forward to welcoming him back very soon. Thank you.